Let me hand you over. Let me hand you over to Ikram.
Yes, thank you, Claire, and thank you everyone for joining. So as mentioned previously, today's session is essentially on the immigration part and looking at particularly the elements of employing workers from the EU post-Brexit. So we'll just get straight into the slides if we can, please, Helen. Yeah, so let's look at sort of the two situations that you may still face when looking to employ sort of EU nationals. You may have EU, EEA or Swiss nationals that were residing in the UK by 31st of December, so prior to, of course, Brexit. And then you'll have a situation of looking to employ those EU nationals that weren't residing in the UK by 31st of December. So we first look at the situation with the EU nationals that were residing in the UK and what status they should really have and what should be, the things that you should be looking out for as an employer. Next slide, please, Helen. Thank you. Yeah, so when now looking to employ sort of EU and EEA nationals that were residing in the UK, what they should have done is that they should have applied under the EU settlement scheme, and what they would have is their pre-settled status or settled status at the moment, or the third situation maybe that they have applied and are waiting for the decision to come through. If you then encounter somebody in a situation who hasn't yet applied, although the deadline was to apply by the 30th of June, the government has extended that deadline and said that EU nationals can apply, providing that they have a reasonable excuse for not submitting an application. And there's quite a lot of, broad category, and includes a lot of reasons why people may not have submitted an application, which could certainly, from a starting off point with a pandemic as well, people have had trouble with that. They haven't had access to legal advice, or simply, having spoken to some EU nationals, they somehow weren't even aware of the application that needed to be made by the deadline, or in fact what the process was of making the application. So if that's the situation, the way to sort of help them straight away is to inform them that they have a grace period where they can apply, providing they have the reasonable excuse. Now, if they are first encountered by, say, the Home Office or the enforcement officers, then even the enforcement officers' guidance is that they are given a period of 28 days, so they have to give the EU national 28 days to make the application, and the enforcement officers are not to assess whether there is a reasonable excuse. So you can continue to then employ people that haven't made the application, but they should make the application within that 28-day period. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so then looking at those EU and sort of Swiss nationals that weren't residing in the UK by 31st of December. So the government introduced the new point system on the 1st of December 2020 that applies to all countries overseas, and it started applying to sort of EEA, EU and Swiss nationals from the 1st of January 2021. And the main sort of categories, what we are really looking at here, particularly with the benefit to UKWA sort of employees, and the categories that we're going to go into are going to be the skilled workers or the intra-company sort of visas that might be applicable. So the focus today is very much going to be on those two categories. Next slide, please, Helen. Thank you. Yeah, so I sort of mentioned the two categories. Now, the key difference between the two really are, although they are still looking at bringing skilled worker from overseas, but it may be a case that if you have a presence overseas as well, and you're looking to shift staff and then bring them on engagements to work in the UK, then the intra-company visa can sometimes be more helpful, rather than just going into the skilled worker. But again, the assessment has to be made looking at the objectives and long-term plans as to what they're going to be. Next slide, please, Helen. Thank you. Yeah, so the key requirements under the skilled worker for the new system. So the first of all, employers themselves have to be approved sponsors with the Home Office, and again in the appropriate categories. So there are a number of categories. I mean, the previous slide only pointed out two. Overall, they are least 9 to 10 categories, but as I said, they're less likely to be applicable to sort of UKWA members and then sort of clients. So we're keeping the focus there, but you have to be sort of approved in the relevant category. And then to sponsor the migrant, they must score 70 points. And they do that by, first of all, having a certificate of sponsorship by the employer, which gives them the 20 points. The job has to be at the appropriate level, which now is RQF level 3. It was RQF level 6, so graduate level, prior to the 1st of December. That's now changed. The level has been dropped. So sort of, I think the government sort of acknowledged that there are what they class as a sort of lower skilled jobs that will now need to be fulfilled by, sort of migrants from overseas. And then the 10 points are for English language requirements. Now, the English language requirement can be met through 3 ways. Either you pass an approved test, or if you have a relevant qualification, which may be acceptable, so then you don't need to the test. Or the third situation may be that you are a national of a majority English-speaking country, and you would automatically meet that requirement then. And finally, the 20 points are that the salary must now be 25,600, or the going rate that you have for the particular occupation. So whichever is higher of the two would need to be in that particular situation. Now, you have got some cases where the salary can be lower, and the minimum salary that would need to be paid would be 20,480. And again, that has to be looked at either the particular occupation that they're coming under, whether that's in the shortage of occupation list, or you may have a particular migrant because of their age, they are classed as a new entrant into the industry, where you're then able to pay 70% of the required salary. But the minimum can't be 70% off of 25,600. The bare minimum has to be paid at 20,480. Next slide, please, Helen. So what we want to look at now are the key changes to the skilled worker category, and some of the positives what the government has sort of introduced already. Again, realizing that there is going to be a shortage of sort of staff in the UK, and to fulfill those. So one of the first things they sort of introduced is the abolishment of the resident labour market test, which in my opinion is not just beneficial in the sense that you end up saving time without having to advertise the position to see if you can find somebody in the UK. It gives employers the opportunity to be able to go out and target, the EU market or anywhere across the world, to be able to bring who the employer deems to be the best person for the role. So the resident labour market test essentially previously was there because you first had to offer that job to a British citizen or somebody settled in the UK. Now it's open for the employer to be able to bring who they feel is best candidate for the job, regardless of their nationality. So I think that's been quite a positive. And as previously mentioned, the job level first, the occupations that we're in were more or less at the graduate level. Now that level is dropped to level 3, which is A-level equivalent. So the employees don't need to have that qualification, but as long as the job is at that required level, then that meets the requirements. And again, previously mentioned, salary requirement was 30,000 previously. That's now dropped to 25,600. Or, as I said, there are tradable points with certain occupations and migrant circumstances where it may be as low as 20,480. You have a situation again of the abolishment of the 12 months cooling off period, which means that previously, you may have had people who were sponsored under the skilled worker, or what was formerly known as the Tier 2 general category, whether they worked in the UK. Now, if they worked for a sponsor in the UK under the category, if they left the UK and had gone back, you had to wait a 12-month period before they could apply again. So what's changed now is again, they've got rid of that restriction. So somebody who has previously worked in the UK in the category can immediately apply if you wish to sponsor them, and they don't have to wait. And then again, the abolishment of the quota that you had. So, and then there was a big problem in 2017 and 18 with this quota, because you had a sort of an annual quota, which was broken up into sort of each month, where you could only sponsor certain people overall in the UK. So not just as an individual, but the whole of certificate of sponsorships that would be allocated in the UK, there was a restricted number. And if that month exceeded that limit, you would automatically be sort of refused. And the ones that were being accepted were those that were either on the shortage of occupation list or the higher the salary. So we had a particular situation with employers that were even willing to pay in the region of about £50,000, you know, as an annual salary to somebody, and were being, you know, refused allocation for a good 3 to 4 months because the demand was quite high. So again, a very sort of high positive, where employers now don't need to worry about it. And if they have staff that they've identified that they want to bring across, there's that peace of mind that there isn't a restriction, and they can sort of plan ahead and have the staff come over. And finally, again, you know, one of the big positives is that the duration somebody could spend in the UK, either on the tier 2 general category or the skilled worker category, was the 6 years maximum length of stay. That's no longer applicable, although they are eligible to sort of apply after the 5-year period for indefinite leave to remain if that's continuous residence. But the 6-year maximum is also very beneficial, because it sort of comes in line with the 12-month cooling off period, because you may have had somebody who may have worked for a previous employer for a period of 4 years, and you know, they may be able to come back, but if that restriction was effectively in place, they wouldn't be able to work for you for longer than 2 years. So now you've got a bit of continuity to say, well, you know, they can sort of work for that full 5-year period again until they qualify, or even longer perhaps. So some real positives that was sort of introduced by the government. Next slide, please, Helen. Yeah, so what I've sort of highlighted here very sort of briefly and are the key benefits of being an approved sponsor, and they will sort of, your benefits will vary and then depend on particular businesses and their needs. But one of the things what it can do, and we're certainly seeing now, is that it's helping to sort of resolve staff shortages in some industries. And with the pandemic, there's certainly been the situation where people working from home, or I think people's own working pattern and then the life sort of changed lifestyle. I'm hearing from a lot of employers that their existing employees are saying that we'd rather now go back to working part-time, or even the applications that they're now making, they're seeing a lot more part-time applications coming through rather than people's willingness to sort of work full-time. So what you have is an opportunity to sort of, you know, bring in staff from overseas, and because they're sponsored, they're more sort of, in that sense, a bit more control is over them, and you have that retention of staff really knowing that, you know, they want to be sponsored and then they're willing to work, so they are sort of willing to stay for a longer period of staff. And again, as sort of mentioned previously, you are able to bring specialist staff, so it's not sort of having to deal with, well, this is the only market that we've got available in the UK, you know, these are only the pool of candidates that are available. You can now sort of expand out and then look at sort of recruitment processes overseas to get the best sort of staff coming and working for you, which can be very helpful if, of course, in terms of dealing with your competitors, or, you know, getting the maximum out of your sort of staff. And I think one of the key benefits, which is often overlooked by a lot of employers, and then when I speak to them, they say, well, we haven't really got a drive to sort of go in and recruit people from overseas. But what you actually have in the UK is you know, thousands of students each year graduate in the UK, and they would only look to sort of apply for particular jobs if the company has a sponsor license, because that's one of the things that they sort of have a look at themselves, or are encouraged by, you know, the support that they have through the university. So they would verify first if an employer has, you know, a sponsor license, and if they don't, you know, you wouldn't even see their application. So again, you know, some of the clients I've sort of recently assisted, there's been a high influx of course, you know, candidates that have now applied for jobs for them, with the fact that they've actually got a sponsor license. They're seeing overseas, you know, students who are applying for jobs. So real benefit there. And, you know, something I mentioned earlier, the employee retention is a lot longer, because when you sponsor somebody from overseas, there are restrictions that they can only work for you. There are obviously, you know, some exceptions where they may be able to have a sort of a second job, but that's only part-time, and it can't conflict any of the hours that you know, obviously they're working for yourself. And because they're sponsored, and then the duration that they have to qualify for the settlement in the UK is 5 years, it's less likely that they are then looking to leave a job. So they have a commitment to sort of work for you for a period of 5 years, which of course, you know, as a business, you know the benefits of having staff working for you for quite a long period of time. Next slide, please, Helen. Thank you. Yeah, so very quickly, what I've sort of highlighted here is some of the cost, the process, and some of the key things that as businesses will need to know as a starting point. So the sponsor license fee is either £536 or £1,476, and the difference there is £536 is if you are classed as a small business, and you are a small business if you meet two of the following three requirements. So for Home Office application purposes, if you have staff which is 50 or less, that's one element. The second element is that your annual turnover is less than 10.2 million. And the third is that your assets are less than 5.1 million. So if the value of your assets are less than 5.1 million. So any two of the three, you're classed as a small business. So your fee would be £536. If the two don't apply, the fee that you've got is £1,476 for your sponsor license. That's granted for a period of 4 years. And sorry, and again, one of the things, if you are also registered as a charity, which may be sort of rare in this particular situation, but if you are registered as a charity as well, then the fee is £536. So as I said, so the license is granted for a period of 4 years. It's renewable, and then that cost is then paid for the next 4 years sort of period as well. In terms of the process, the application is submitted online, and the mandatory documents are now also submitted online, which saves the time of them having to go out in post. And the Home Office aims to make a decision within 8 weeks of submission of all of the documents and that application itself. Or what they've introduced again from December last year is a priority service, where a decision may be made in 10 working days if you pay an additional £500 on top of the sponsor license fee, and it's 10 working days from the date your request is sort of accepted. So you submit your request, and it may be a case that your priority request is not accepted on the first day. And we've had certainly some situations where I've been up at sort of midnight and using the faster finger first. So as soon as the clock turns 12 o'clock, you submit in that request for the client for them to be able to get that. And the key benefit of course, having that again is, if you've got plans that you're looking to recruit somebody quickly, then that's something that you look at. But my advice certainly has been to people is to become approved sponsors, because then you're almost not sort of getting caught up in a situation where you're waiting for a decision or you're having to incur additional cost. If you feel that the benefits are there, then get that application in early. And we are seeing benefits from those sort of employers that have made the applications earlier, that they are now in a much quicker sort of a way where they're able to sort of get decisions and then bring staff over a lot more quickly. And then the key thing, I think, for the sponsor license application, one of the key things, what you've really got to show as a business, is that there is a genuine vacancy that you're trying to fulfill. So it's not being done for the purposes of bringing a family member over. I mean, we wouldn't think that would be the case, but there are certain businesses that have that. So as part of your application, you're justifying that case. So what we're doing as representatives is providing the company information, but also putting a case forward as to why the company actually needs the license. So you're highlighting if there are staff sort of shortages, if there has been a change in trend, if you're a business that's historically employed a lot of people from the EU or the parts of the world that may have been working for the visas, or that you have any one particular candidate that you wish to employ, that's good enough. So even if you want to employ one candidate, having a license and then the justification of that case is really good. And then as an employer, you've got to look at whether you have the sort of appropriate systems and then the monitoring systems in place. So as an employer, are you aware and what your role and your responsibilities are? Because that's the key part in terms of making the application. Sadly, a large number of employees seem to think it's this case of submitting the application in and then bringing a migrant over. My advice is to sort of have the appropriate systems in place, or at least, at the same time, if you're making the application, make sure you're aware, because there are compliance duties that you've got to sort of go through. And then again, the key personnel that you've got to sort of have in terms of the license. So these are people within the organization that you will employ to sort of have that. And I think the appropriate systems comes very much in line with the sort of compliance that's there as well. Next slide, please, Helen. Yeah, so what I've sort of just done is highlighted some of the some occupations here, so not too many. And again, you know, with sort of UKWA, there's a wide sort of roles that may be needed. But what I've done is I've highlighted some sort of occupations there, and you know, some salaries, sort of the point there, and the reasons why I've sort of highlighted the logistics or warehouse manager there is that you have got the sort of you know, the salary that's required is 24,300, but what you'll sort of recall from what I mentioned earlier is that the minimum salary has to be 25,600. So a classic example here where a particular occupation code, the salary its requirement is lower, but it would be a case that if you were looking to bring a logistics or warehouse manager, the minimum salary that you'd be looking to pay them would be 25,600. And again, you've got some higher ones in cases there. So if you know, you were looking to bring in, so say for example, a sales manager or business development manager, the minimum salary that you're looking to pay them is 35,400 rather than the 25,600. So those are just, of course, the contact details. So you've got the email address and then contact telephone numbers, and of course, you know, Aaron and partners. So if you're not reachable there, you know, can be contacted through Aaron's. I think we have some questions. Don't we? I've noticed some questions have been coming in at the bottom. So should we go through those?
I need to just read them out to you, Ikram, and then.
Please, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the first question was from Megan, which is, when was the deadline extended to? That was from one of your earlier slides.
Yeah, so they haven't given a deadline where it's extended to, and then the reason for that really at the moment is because somebody, for example, that's on pre-settled status may just be granted pre-settled status now, and they would only be eligible to apply for settled status in 5 years' time. So it's going to be very difficult for the Home Office to close that application just for practical reasons. But for the time being, they haven't made an announcement when they're looking to close that. But I think, you know, there are chances that it's likely to be open. And when they say a reasonable excuse, the longer that period, you know, the longer you leave to apply, then that reasonableness becomes more questionable, really. So the earlier they apply, the better.
From John, how long on average is the process of gaining the status taking to be completed?
Yeah, again, so as I sort of mentioned, so it really depends on how quickly you sort of either, you know, put your application in, so how quickly can you get your documents together. So the quickest process I've really had is from instructions for somebody is within sort of 15 working days, they were able to get the documents over to me. We were lucky to get a priority request in for them early. So they had a license granted within sort of 15 working days in a really quick time from the point of instructions. And there are some, of course, where it takes longer to get the application, but the Home Office very rarely tends to go over the 8 weeks period if you're not looking to use the priority service. Very rarely do go over the 8-week period, and that would only be in situations where, you know, if they're not satisfied with the information that they've been provided, or that they decide randomly that they want to come and interview. Because with things opening up now, the Home Office have announced that they may come and visit some employers. So it's very important when you make the application that the full information is given to them, because it then saves time to avoid any, you know, visits that they may want to make.
The certificate of sponsorship, how easy is it to complete online?
Yeah, so the application form is not too difficult. You know, it asks questions about your company, your organization, and various different things. But it's as I said, the other information that needs to go in to build the case in. So the online application form is more information about the company, which can be completed. But from my perspective, it's not the application form. It's the information that's got to go in, and not necessarily the documents either. It's the compliance part and making sure you're fully aware of everything before you make that application, or you're taken through that process whilst your application is being considered, so you have the right advice, really. So yeah, I think the form's basic, but there's a lot more to becoming an approved sponsor than just filling out an application form.
So another question from John: what determines a single sponsor? So if there are a group of companies, is it one per registered company, or can one sponsor apply, one sponsorship, is it, apply across groups?
So it depends. It depends on the structure. If you have like sort of one head sort of a company, and then within the company you've got different organizations. If the employees being, you know, so this is when you're completing the details, and you really have to look at individual circumstances or the company structure. Generally, you would look at, yes, so they would only be working for one particular company at a time that would be sponsoring them. But if you have a sort of a parent holding company and you're fulfilling the same role for different various companies, then it can be sort of managed in the sense that the parent holding company has a license, and then it's workable. But again, I think the key thing is to sort of have a look at the structure and the role that the person is going to be performing before you can give a definitive answer on that.
How far in depth will a genuine vacancy be checked from a compliance perspective?
Yeah, so you're required to, as part of the application, to provide information about the vacancy that you've got. So again, you're providing information about the company structure, and then you're giving details about the job description, the role, whether you have advertised. So as I mentioned, the resident labour market test is now abolished. But again, there's a justification of the cases. It's how have you identified this employee? And if the employees are sort of, somehow related to you, that in itself can then sort of present some sort of challenges, or otherwise known to you sort of things. This is information that you have to sort of disclose at the start. So depending on, of course, those situations, it's there. So if you have been looking to advertise, if you've advertised a role, say for, several months, and you're really struggling, and you can see a recruitment drive there, then that case very much is there, but you are sort of providing that information there. You're informing the Home Office when you placed the adverts, and then why you've not been able to find a suitable candidate. But as I mentioned, there is no need now to show that you can't find them in the UK. You can choose somebody from outside. You've just got to show how you identify them.
And a final question from Megan, and then we have a couple that were given to us prior to the presentation. So just got a couple of minutes left. More from Megan. Do you know what the take up for sponsor licenses is like? Is it mostly larger employers, or are smaller businesses also taking up?
Yeah, no. So I've got businesses from all sizes. I mean, the smallest business that I've helped become an approved sponsor is just a director himself. He's working, but he's looking for the staff to come over, and because the plans are he wants to expand into a particular market. So just one employee, and then that's himself. Whereas and then I've sort of helped sort of large organizations with sort of thousands of employees. So I think it ranges from there to one employee to 1,000 really, and then it really is a case of your business need, and then why you're applying for it.
One more specific then. I think the other two questions are quite opinion based, so I'll start with the specific one, which was before. How much of the new duties fall upon the employee versus their employer? And do you think the government has got the balance right?
Yeah, so really good question, really, because it was touching on the compliance element that I was saying. So really what you have got as an employer, you've got your compliance that you've got to fulfill. So as an employer, you've got to make sure that you're doing all of that. And it's not always compliance really strictly with immigration and that particular migrant. There are UK wider laws that you've really got to look at. And something even as a difference within a change of structure within the organization, although may not impact the employee or have nothing to do with immigration related, it still has to be reported on your sponsor management system. So the government needs to know any sort of structural changes. So the compliance part is I think the onus on shift is more on the employer, because you're taking on the responsibility of bringing somebody over, but equally important for the employee that they are sort of complying with their visa requirements. So I think the requirements for the employee really are in terms of the visa requirements themselves, but as an employer, you've got to look at a lot of wider sort of things that you would normally look at when employing somebody in the UK, as well as, of course, then you're taking on the responsibilities to say, well, we are sort of responsible for this person for at least a period of 5 years, or if you're sponsoring for a less duration, then you're at least taking on that responsibility.
Very interesting questions to finish. From John again. Given the political pressure for lower skilled or paid positions, in your opinion, will there be further concessions to placate disgusted from Tunbridge Wells type letters in the Telegraph about food shortages, etc.?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Given the political, perhaps John, you can ask it directly. Oh, we still can't hear you, I'm afraid.
We can't hear you, sorry.
No, given the political pressure at the moment around lower skilled and lower paid positions, In your opinion, will there be further concessions to placate the Daily Telegraph crowd about issues around food shortages? So I imagine that means, do you think the government are going to drop that salary requirement a bit further to allow us to staff the restaurants and fill the shelves in the supermarkets and manage all the other?
I think the salary requirements and the element come from the skill level that you're really looking to employ. So I think the focus of the government at the moment was that they dropped it from level 6 to level 3. So it really was to sort of accommodate that. How far they go into sort of dropping it further really, I think, depends on a pattern as going forward. But I think with the announcement that are certainly coming forward for 2021 and 22, there don't appear to be any immediate plans. But I think, again, they had to sort of act very quickly on healthcare and with the pandemic. So they made an exception for a particular industry in those areas where they can, sort of opened up a completely different application for them, and the requirements were very much different. So again, with the food and then sort of other industries, it may well happen. And we've seen that happen with chefs in recent times, because there was a shortage. Chefs were on a shortage of occupation list, and you could only, as an establishment, bring in certain amounts of chefs, for an example. But they really changed that in terms of although it's gone off the shortage of occupation list, now you're having to pay a lot less than you were, and an establishment is able to employ more than one chef in a particular area. So there are less restrictions than there were before. So I think the government, from what it appears and the positive changes that they have made, they are sort of responding to the things that need to be done. But just how quickly they do it it's difficult to answer.
That leads us into our final question, Ikram. If you would mind just wrapping it up very quickly, as we're just over time. What are the 3 key points that you would wish to get across to the UK government about the issues caused by the ending of free movement?
Well, okay. I think as a solicitor, I think it's difficult. I think, to be honest, I have to admit there are a lot of positive, which I've sort of highlighted, that I think the government has taken into consideration. And perhaps I think for UKWA, I don't know if Claire wants to add something there. If there are something points that she may say that within the sort of the industry or things that are needs there. But I think the real action is that changes have been in place, and I think what they're sort of announcing moving forward into the reforms, what they have announced in 2022, is that they do want to make it less onerous on sort of employers. They want to introduce better systems in place, and then make it better, and then create a knowledge. So I think another positive, what they have sort of done in recent times, is that they're now allowing sort of a representative to be added to a sponsor license. So your legal advice to avoid any breaches of licenses and avoid fines, you're able to do that. So in not just terms of employment, I think that you are seeing relaxations by government where they're making systems easier for employers to manage. And then, as I said, if Claire wants to particularly add anything about the association, then that's...
I think thank you for that, Ikram. I think our view would be we would seek some leniency in enforcement, considering that these rules are so new, and we would also be keen to see that level 3 reduced to a level 2 because of large numbers that are needed at level 2 as well as level 3. But as you say, there has already been a concession. As we've heard, we're a little bit over time. I'd just like to wrap things up really by saying a huge thank you to you, Ikram, for running us through so much information in quite a short space of time, but with real expertise and insight. It's been very, very useful indeed. And thank you to the people who've dialed in as well and joined the call and posed such interesting questions. A recording of this session is going to be available on the UKWA website. So thanks very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.